Nestled along a gently curving bay, the small town of Larkspur Landing seemed almost too idyllic for its own good. Vibrant blooms in every color imaginable adorned window boxes and storefronts, saturating Main Street with splashes of red, pink, and yellow. Residents prided themselves on keeping perfectly manicured lawns and trimming their hedges into elegant shapes. There was a close-knit warmth in the air, as if the townspeople shared a collective understanding of harmony and neighborly kindness. In the middle of it all stood Dreamy Blooms, a modest florist shop with a hanging sign depicting a larkspur flower in pastel hues. On most days, a mild clinking of its bell announced someone's arrival or departure. Wicker baskets on wooden shelves displayed roses, daisies, and lilies, filling the shop with a scent of fresh petals and cut stems. Aubrey Matthews ran Dreamy Blooms with a quiet passion. She had inherited the shop from her mother, but as far back as she could remember, she had always loved flowers. In elementary school, she was known for pressing wildflowers between the pages of her notebooks, scribbling the names of each variety in careful cursive. Now, after years of formal study and a deep devotion to her craft, she had refined her own style of floral arrangement, a blend of rustic charm and classic elegance. Customers appreciated her thoughtfully chosen bouquets, each carefully crafted for birthdays and anniversaries, or simply as a cheery pick-me-up. Large windows bathed her workspace in morning light, illuminating the leaves in a gentle shimmer. The hum of daily life lulled her into a routine she found soothing, though she would never have guessed how her world was about to shift. Late one morning, while restocking chrysanthemums near the display window, Aubrey discovered a dusty old journal tucked in an antique trunk that she used for storing ribbon. She had intended to search the trunk for vintage lace to wrap around a wedding bouquet, but her hand landed on the small, leather-bound book instead. Curious, she brushed away a thin film of dust and opened the journal. Much of its content was blank, but slipped between a few of the empty pages were several pressed flowers, each flattened carefully, as though meticulously preserved for some hidden purpose. There were 4 distinct blooms, and each carried an air of mystery that caught her attention. They were labeled in faded ink, with names and dates that she didn't recognize. She brought the journal to the counter, carefully removing the pressed flowers and arranging them side by side. One was a white lily dated June 3, 1986. Another was a single blue forget-me-not from May 18, 1992. Then a pale yellow rose from September 10, 2000, and finally, a dark purple pansy from April 2, 2006. The handwriting next to each specimen was different, indicating multiple authors or, perhaps, notes scrawled hastily under different circumstances. None of it immediately made sense to her. Aubrey had never seen these blooms before, nor had she come across any mention of them in the shop's old records. Intrigue stirred within her. Why preserve these flowers so carefully, and why note those specific dates? She set the journal aside as a customer arrived, a smiling older woman wanting a bouquet of tulips, but Aubrey's mind remained fixated on her puzzling discovery. Soon, the sweet hush of midday lulled the shop into a brief respite between customers, and she opened her laptop on the front counter. Searching online for the dates alongside the word Larkspur Landing, she stumbled onto a small local website linking historical records and archived obituaries. Her breath caught as her cursor hovered over the matching date of the first pressed flower. It was tied to an obituary for someone named Lucy Gardner. She skimmed the notice, heart pounding as she recognized Lucy's date of death was indeed June 3, 1986. Odd, Aubrey thought. The next date corresponded to Mary Boucher, who had passed away on May 18, 1992. And so on, each pressed flower coinciding with a death in town. A jolt of concern coursed through her. Was there a grim message behind these pressings? Why would anyone note individuals' dates of death alongside preserved flowers? Flicking through more of the archives, she realized each obituary told a mundane, fairly unremarkable tale of a life gently ended. Terminal illnesses or old age, except for one, the final date associated with the dark purple pansy. Tony Willis had died under somewhat suspicious circumstances on April 2, 2006. The short obituary gave no further detail, simply stating he was found at his home, and an investigation had led nowhere. That evening, Aubrey walked home by lantern-lit streets. The sky glowed with a soft twilight, but she barely noticed the lovely scenery. Her mind buzzed with questions. As she unlocked the door to her cottage, the familiar scent of lavender from her small garden offered a moment's comfort. Still, curiosity about the mysterious journal wouldn't still. She prepared a simple dinner of Parmesan pasta, but could hardly taste it. She pored over old newspapers she found in archived websites, reading every mention of the 4 individuals whose deaths were tied to those flowers. Nothing stood out as a connecting thread, yet there was a nagging sense in her gut that she was missing something, some link that wove them together. Determined to put the puzzle pieces in order, Aubrey decided to confide in her best friend, Clara Maxwell, a librarian at the Larkspur Landing Community Library. Clara's eyes lit up at the mention of old records and cryptic clues, and she readily volunteered her help. The following morning, Aubrey shut the shop early. She left a polite sign on the door indicating she'd return in the afternoon and headed to the library. Among tall shelves of books, Clara greeted her with a wave and ushered her to a small table. Clara studied the journal. She inspected each pressed flower and read the faded notes. Then she turned her laptop's screen toward Aubrey, revealing older microfilm archives. "We'll look for patterns in the obituaries. Sometimes these old newspapers mention a friend or a family member who's repeated. Maybe that's our thread," Clara mused. As they scanned through pages, they noticed faint references to a volunteer group that had once been active in the town. A single mention surfaced multiple times. Friends of the Landing Garden Society, Lucy, Mary, Tony, and the third deceased, Josephine, were all listed as members at one point. According to the articles, it was a group dedicated to beautifying public spaces around Larkspur Landing. Why these 4 members' passings were being recorded with pressed flowers remained unclear, but it seemed too much of a coincidence to dismiss. Feeling the first spark of real progress, the 2 friends resolved to find more about the Garden Society. Over the next few days, Aubrey asked around town. She finally found an older gentleman, Mr. Patterson, who once served as the Society's treasurer in the late 1970s. When she visited his small cottage on the outskirts of Larkspur Landing, the smell of fresh basil drifting from his greenhouse greeted her. The kindly retiree's eyes twinkled as he recounted stories of the Society's philanthropic missions. Planting flower beds by the harbour, organising community potlucks, and raising funds for new benches in the public parks. However, Mr. Patterson also revealed that a rift had developed within the group about 15 years ago, leading many members to leave. He did recall Lucy, Mary, Tony, and Josephine quite fondly, remarking that they were skilled gardeners but kept mostly to themselves. When pressed about any suspicious circumstances, he admitted that Tony's death had been the subject of hushed whispers. Some believed he'd uncovered a secret. "The question," Mr. Patterson said, "is what that secret might have been." With the small clue about Tony's rumoured discovery swirling in her mind, Aubrey returned to her shop, only to find a small envelope slid under the door. Inside was a single pressed flower, a sprig of love in a mist, without any note or explanation. Startled, she looked around, but only the serene shadows of Main Street greeted her. The pressed sprig effectively mirrored the style of the others from the old journal, down to the precise flattening and placement on parchment paper. Unlike the original 4, however, no date or name was written beside it. Instead, there was only a faint watermark in one corner, something that looked like an intertwined LL, presumably standing for Larkspur Landing. A shiver traced down Aubrey's spine at the thought that whoever created those older pressings was still out there, or at least someone who knew their significance. This was no random coincidence. The next morning she brought the new pressed flower to Clara at the library. Together they combed through the obituary records again, focusing on any mention of a love in a mist bloom. They discovered a passing reference to that flower in an article about a memorial service for the Garden Society's founder, Harriet Knowles, who had died many years prior. Oddly, her obituary lacked details and carried a final line about fostering secrecy in the language of flowers. Aubrey and Clara were at a loss to decipher its meaning. Their break finally came on a quiet afternoon when Clara texted Aubrey, "Found something! Magenta files! Hurry!" Aubrey rushed over, arriving breathless in the library's back room, where Clara had a box of old meeting minutes from community organizations. One labeled Friends of the Landing Garden Society, Archive, contained notes from the group's earliest days. Clara's fingers skimmed lines of neat cursive. "Given Harriet's wishes, we have decided to keep the key hidden within the heart of the garden. The code is in the flowers." A few pages later, there was a library card with pressed saffron crocuses arranged in a circle, though no further explanation. Aubrey's heart pulsed with excitement. A code hidden in flowers. Could Harriet have left a puzzle that society members understood? They scoured more meeting minutes, eventually discovering Harriet's plan to create a floral cryptogram that would guide future generations to a place of importance. The instructions were maddeningly vague, hinting that each flower corresponded to a letter or clue. The society apparently disbanded before this puzzle could be properly passed on, but Harriet had left behind hints in various corners of the town. A trail of cryptic blooms. The 4 individuals with pressed flowers and listed obituaries had presumably held parts of the puzzle, each date linking to a flower that symbolized something in the floral language Harriet loved. White lily for innocence, forget-me-not for true love or remembrance, a yellow rose for friendship, and a purple pansy for loving thoughts and memories. And now the new piece. Love in a mist signified secrecy or something elusive. Aubrey felt a mix of awe and trepidation at the possibility that Harriet's puzzle was still alive decades later. At day's end, Aubrey politely locked Dreamy Blooms, placing a small sign reading, "Closed for personal business." Under cover of dusk, she headed to the old community gardens by the harbour, once maintained by the society. If Harriet had hidden something in the garden's heart, it might be at the central fountain, which had long been drained and left to rot. The path was poorly lit, but the glimmer of the moon reflected against scattered puddles. Memories of summer garden festivals bubbled up in Aubrey's mind when laughter and music once filled the air. She spotted the rusted fountain ringed by overgrown shrubs. Gently brushing aside thick clusters of weeds, her fingers found an etched plaque on the fountain's base. She flicked on a small flashlight and read the plaque. "In memory of Harriet Knowles, who believed life's answers lie in the flowers we grow." It seemed ordinary enough, but a faint line beneath the plaque read, "Love's compass points to innocence, friendship, remembrance, and memory. Within them is the answer." Recalling the 4 obituary flowers, lily for innocence, rose for friendship, forget-me-not for remembrance, and pansy for memory, Aubrey realized they might form directions, could each correspond to north, south, east, and west. She tested a hypothesis, turning in the direction that each flower might symbolically represent. When she aligned them in an imaginary circle, white lily to the north, yellow rose to the south, forget-me-not to the east, and pansy to the west, her flashlight beam revealed a broken stone in the pavement. Carefully prying it loose, she discovered a tiny wooden. Her breath quickened. Inside the box lay a single key with a paper tag reading, "Basement, Harriet's house." Early the next morning, Aubrey hurried to Harriet's old residence, recently converted into a bed and breakfast known as the Knowles Inn. She approached the owner, Miss Pettigrew, a gentle, scholarly woman who wore reading glasses perched on top of her head. Aubrey explained she had uncovered an old key linked to Harriet's possessions. Miss Pettigrew listened with intrigue. though she hesitated about granting access. Finally, curiosity won over, and she guided Aubrey down creaking stairs into a musty basement. Old trunks and furniture littered the corners, draped in dust covers. With the flick of a switch, a single bulb lit the space, its glow casting long shadows. Aubrey tried each lock she found, until one old wooden cabinet's padlock clicked open with Harriet's key. Inside was a tidy set of shelves. A handwritten letter rested on top, attached to a battered metal box that bore Harriet's initials. Opening the letter revealed Harriet's script. "To whomever finds this, know that I kept a secret which might have saved 4 dear friends. We discovered that our group's treasurer laundered charitable funds to finance a shady operation. Tony, Lucy, Mary, and Josephine tried to uncover the truth, but they grew ill at ease. Tony told me he was being watched. I instructed them to record our findings in the language of flowers, believing we might eventually expose the truth. If you are reading this, I trust you'll do right by us. The box holds receipts and ledgers detailing the full wrongdoing. Don't let the misdeeds remain hidden in the soil." Aubrey's shoulders tensed. The treasurer, Harriet referred to. Could it be Mr. Patterson, the kind old man she'd visited? Or perhaps another treasurer who held that title more recently? With trembling hands she opened the metal box, finding a substantial pile of receipts tied in twine. Along with a small letter flicking through, she saw large sums donated by unsuspecting townspeople, diverted to an organization in the next county. Mixed in were references to shipments described only as private goods. It seemed Harriet had gathered evidence that someone systematically embezzled from the Garden Society's philanthropic funds. She realized Tony might indeed have discovered this secret. Perhaps that knowledge had placed him in danger. The correlation between the 4 pressed flowers and those obituaries took on a stark cast. Maybe they were not simply marking their deaths, but pointing to a motive behind them. Feeling faint, Aubrey carefully locked the metal box and replaced Harriet's letter. She then thanked Miss Pettigrew and left, the sound of her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. After a moment's thought, she decided to confront Mr. Patterson. He was sweet, but he had admitted he'd served as treasurer. That didn't automatically mean he was responsible, but perhaps he could name who else held the title over the years. She found him sipping tea on his small porch, looking fragile in the late afternoon light. With gentle but direct questioning, she showed him Harriet's ledger. His eyes went wide and he sucked in a breath. He explained that in the mid-1980s, ill health had forced him to step down. His replacement was Edna Riley, who took over for only a few years before resigning, and then William Knowles, Harriet's own nephew, served a stint. Next came another man, Charles Barrett, who oversaw the group until it dissolved. Aubrey recognized the name. Charles Barrett was a local developer with a reputation for cunning business deals, some rumored to be borderline unethical. By then, Harriet would have been too old to tackle him head-on. She had entrusted her younger friends to help, but clearly their attempts to expose him ended only in tragedy. "I always suspected something was off, but I never had proof," Mr. Patterson lamented. "And after Tony's strange passing, the rest of us were too afraid to speak out." He sighed, exhaustion in his voice. That evening, Aubrey reached out to the local authorities, handing over Harriet's ledger and the receipts. A wave of relief washed through her as she realized the puzzle Harriet had left was now in safe hands. The entire scheme, embezzling charitable funds and possibly tampering with the group's finances, would come to light. If Barrett was still around, he'd have to answer for his actions. Though the Garden Society was no more, its final secret stood on the brink of revelation. Days passed, and the hush of rumor snaked through Larkspur. The local police announced that charges were being considered against Charles Barrett, who had quietly retired to a nearby town. Preliminary investigation revealed a paper trail matching Harriet's ledger. The town debated how far Barrett might have gone to silence any potential whistleblowers. Tony's case, once considered suspicious but never resolved, was reopened, people in Larkspur Landing shared a sense of stunned curiosity, uncertain how so cozy a place could harbour such a dark secret for so long. Aubrey received quiet thanks from older residents who remembered Harriet fondly. She also received the occasional pointed, curious glance from neighbours who wondered how and why she'd gotten herself mixed up in such an old matter. Regardless, she sensed a gentle acknowledgement in the air. Harriet's voice had finally been heard. One bright morning, an unexpected visitor appeared at Dreamy Blooms. A woman introduced herself as Harriet Knowles' great-niece, Eliza. With a soft-spoken sincerity, Eliza expressed her gratitude to Aubrey for finishing what Harriet had started. She didn't know about the puzzle, but she recognized Harriet's nature. "My grandaunt was a believer in the hidden meanings of flowers. She always said, 'You can speak quiet truth with petals,'" Eliza said, smiling. In a way, that explained why Harriet had recorded everything in this cryptic, botanical manner. Though it turned out to be a tragic story with heartbreak for Lucy, Mary, Tony, and Josephine, it also spoke of Harriet's unwavering dedication to justice. There was a poignant beauty in how Harriet had trusted future lovers of flowers to unearth the hidden pattern in pressed petals. In the following weeks, life in Larkspur Landing reverted to its gentle rhythms. Tourists sipped coffee at the harbour cafe, children played in the park beneath old copper beech trees, and musical chimes rang from the antique clock tower. But the old community garden started seeing renewed interest. A group of enthusiastic volunteers banded together to restore it, pulling weeds and replanting perennial blooms. Aubrey led a workshop there one Saturday, teaching families and their kids how to press their own flowers. As she guided them gently, she couldn't help but reflect on the remarkable chain of events that had led her to discover an enigma hidden in dusty pages. Once the workshop was over, Aubrey wandered among the flower beds, greeting old neighbours and new faces joining the volunteer efforts. The sight of fresh blossoms reminded her that something positive had come from the sadness of the past. If Harriet could see this revival, she would be proud to know the townspeople were working hand in hand to keep Larkspur Landing a place of vibrant beauty. She spotted Clara near the central fountain, which now flowed again with crystal-clear water. Clara knelt there, adjusting a cluster of purple pansies at the edge. When she saw Aubrey, she grinned. "So," she teased, "are you going to miss unraveling cryptic clues and rummaging through old archives? Or do you think you'll hang up your detective hat?" Aubrey laughed softly. "Oh, I won't mind a little break. I love a good puzzle. But next time, let's hope it's a bit less dark. A harmless town mystery would be preferable. For instance, who's been leaving sugar cookies on the library steps?" She paused, inhaling the soft fragrance of fresh malt and newly planted marigolds. "I'm just glad Harriet finally got her story told." Together they walked toward the fountain, admiring the reflection of the late afternoon sun dancing over the water's surface. Kids splashed coins into the fountain, making wishes. Flowers in every shade of pink, orange, yellow, and purple lined the paths, a living tapestry of hope and renewal. Moments like these, Aubrey realized, were at the heart of Larkspur Landing. Behind the pastel facades and the blooming window boxes existed an enduring spirit of neighborly kindness. Though small shadows of secrecy had crept into the town's past, they were now brought under the daylight. It felt, to Aubrey, like a much-needed gift. With the final chapters of Harriet's Enigma written, life went on as usual in Larkspur Landing, except for one difference. Talk of revitalizing the old garden society spread eagerly. Over cups of chamomile tea or while strolling on the beach, residents discussed how best to coordinate a new iteration of the group. With accountability measures this time, Aubrey found herself at the heart of these discussions, asked to oversee finances once a new society formed, an ironic twist, considering the fiasco she'd just uncovered. She politely declined to be treasurer, but she agreed to serve as a supportive voice, and a source of floral expertise. Some evenings, when the shop lights dimmed and the sign flipped to closed, Aubrey sat at her work table and gently pressed a new set of flowers, labeling them with each day's date. But these pressings carried no hidden messages of sorrow. Instead, they served as a record of renewal and the quiet triumph of truth. She was more aware than ever that flowers could speak. They whispered reminders of love, grief, secrets, and hope. That knowledge rested in the petals she so carefully arranged for weddings and birthdays, bridging the cycle of life's joys and sorrows. Almost a month after Harriet's antique ledger had come to light, a letter arrived. It was from the Larkspur Landing Historical Society, requesting permission to display the puzzle artifacts in a small museum exhibit devoted to the Garden Society's legacy. Sipping her morning coffee, Aubrey felt a swell of pride. Harriet's quiet plan to hide clues in flowers would be recognized as a piece of local history. More than that, it would stand as a testament to how a single person's dedication could continue to spread seeds of truth and justice long after they were gone. Finishing her coffee, Aubrey slipped into her apron, preparing the shop for a day of vibrant possibilities. The early sun sparkled through the windows, illuminating the delicate array of roses in pinks and whites, the Botticello daisies, and the regal purple of her pansies. In the back of the shop, safely tucked away, lay Harriet's journal and the handful of pressed flowers that had started it all. On the front counter, Aubrey displayed a small vase of love in a mist, a subtle nod to the marvelous mystery she had unraveled, blooming into a new story, one that would be retold in quiet corners and cherished as part of the town's rich tapestry. And in that peaceful morning light, it felt as though Larkspur Landing had opened a new chapter of its own, one filled with bright blossoms and a whispering promise that the truth, much like a bud in spring, inevitably finds a way to bloom.